CBS reporter got a snappy response from President Joe Biden today, and it was yet another example of a mainstream press reporter focusing on not the peace talks between Russia and Ukraine, but on whether or not the United States is willing to escalate this war. Let's watch.
Sir, deterrence didn't work. What makes you think Vladimir Putin will alter course based on the action you've taken today?
Let's get something straight. You remember, if you covered me from the very beginning, I did not say that, in fact, the sanctions would deter him. Sanctions never deter. You keep talking about that. Sanctions never deter. The maintenance of sanctions, the increasing the pain, and the demonstration why I asked for this NATO meeting today is to be sure that after a month we will sustain what we're doing, not just next month, the following month, but for the remainder of this entire year. That's what will stop him.
Do you believe the actions today will have an impact on making Russia change course in Ukraine?
That's not what I said. You're playing a game with me. I know. The answer is no.
So this is a common narrative, a common theme that you'll notice during press conferences, not only with President Joe Biden, but also with his White House press secretary, Jen Psaki. Over and over again, it's the same question, maybe framed a little differently. Will you implement a no-fly zone? Will you escalate the war with Russia? Will you send more weaponry to Ukraine? What about the fighter jets? War, 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 war. It's the underlying message is, you look weak, Biden, because all you're doing is implementing sanctions. But they never really think through what the consequences would be to escalate a war with a nuclear country, with a country that has nuclear weapons. And a country, by the way, that is led by a man who clearly is irrational in many ways. I mean, the fact that he invaded Ukraine in the first place was something that, honestly, I did not predict because it was such an irrational move. It worked against his own economic interests, Putin's economic interests. The war has been severely miscalculated by Putin, but nonetheless, he has proven himself to be someone who is willing to carry out a war in a way that's incredibly irrational. Given that thought, given that information, given what we know about Putin, to hear reporters ask for an escalation of war over and over and over again, it just really boggles the mind. It makes one question whether they've ever sat down to think about the consequences of doing that. And I understand calls for a no-fly zone from Vladimir Zelensky. His country is being shelled, it's being bombed, it's being destroyed right now. I understand that very human reaction to what he's experiencing. But for US reporters to sit there and make it appear as if this is nothing more than a fun video game, and hey, why didn't you use those superpowers that you have? Why are you standing back and allowing this to happen? It's so ridiculous, this isn't a game. And look, if that CBS reporter was the only example, sure, it might be a little bit of a story, but again, this is very common. I want to go to an ABC News reporter who had a very similar type of statement or question for Biden. Let's watch.
Sir, you've made it very clear in this conflict that you do not want to see World War III. But is it possible that in expressing that so early that you were too quick to rule out direct military intervention in this war? Could Putin have been emboldened knowing that you are not going to get involved directly in this conflict?
No and no.
Were you too quick to rule out World War III? That was a question by an ABC News reporter. Were you too quick to rule out World War III? What did she expect the answer to be? Yeah, I think I was too quick to rule out World War III. Let's do it. Let's escalate this to World War III. Does she understand what that means? Has she thought about the gravity of that? And is this ever thought of as anything more than a game for them? How many times do the reporters ask about the possible ceasefire, peace negotiations? Those, I get it. Those questions, that kind of conversation might be boring to them. But we should be learning more about the type of communication that's taking place between the Russians and Ukrainians, between European Union members, NATO countries, and the United States. How effective have the sanctions been? What are we doing to help support Ukrainian refugees? There are other areas where we could be focusing the reporting. Areas that have been, in my opinion, underreported relative to the amount of news coverage we've seen about the fighter jets and about a possible no-fly zone. And let me just say, I have to give Biden a little bit of credit here. I know we've been doing it in this context when it comes to this war in Ukraine, but I'm actually a little shocked at how measured he's been and how he's been refusing to implement the no-fly zone despite, all these rabid journalists incessantly asking for one in the context or in the form of a question during these press conferences. And by the way, it's become such a common theme during these press conferences that The Intercept put together not one, but 2 compilation videos featuring these reporters calling for an escalation of war. Let's watch a piece of one of those videos.
Even with this additional aid that you're providing today, it seems there are still other options on the table. So why hold back? Why not use every tool at your disposal now to spare additional lives? What are you waiting for?
President Zelensky, in his remarks to Congress today, again made his request for a no-fly zone. He no doubt is aware of President Biden's position on that. Is there any scenario in which President Biden would change his mind?
And as we've said before, a no-fly zone would require implementation. It would require us potentially shooting down Russian planes, NATO shooting down Russian planes, and we are not interested in getting into World War III.
I like the way Psaki answered that question by specifically describing what a no-fly zone means. Shooting down Russian planes. That means that we are now at war with Russia. And so some might argue, maybe these reporters think that Putin's bluffing, that Putin having nuclear weapons is no big deal. Maybe that's what they think. But I think that we should listen to people, we should hear them out, especially when they tell us exactly who they are. And his spokesperson just this week made it abundantly clear that Putin is in fact willing to use nuclear weapons. Why don't we take a look at what Dmitry Peskov had to say?
I want to ask you again, is President Putin, because again, the Finnish president said to me that when he asked Putin directly about this, because President Putin has laid that card on the table, President Putin said that if anybody tries to stop him, very bad things will happen. And I want to know whether you are convinced or confident that your boss will not use that option.
Well, we have a concept of domestic security. And well, it's public. You can read all the reasons for nuclear arms to be used. So if it is an existential threat for our country, then it can be used in accordance with our concept.
I think they're pretty clear. They're definitely willing to use nuclear weapons. Nuclear deterrence is real because there is a genuine and legitimate fear of mutually assured destruction. Nuclear war is not a game, it's not a joke. And I wish reporters understood the gravity of that. I wish their questions focused more, like if they want to use these press conferences to pressure Biden in a direction, the direction they should be pushing him toward is anything the United States can do to help support peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. But I guess that it doesn't bode well for ratings. It doesn't make this situation exciting or newsworthy in their eyes. I don't know. But a no-fly zone is not, I get it, it's a euphemism. It sounds like this very polite thing that just protects people. No, it means an escalation of war between the United States and Russia, potentially our NATO allies and Russia. It could lead to absolutely devastating consequences, and they just do not want to understand the gravity of that. At least their questions make it appear as such.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that All you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.